This is a lesson we can all use, a lesson on how to deal with difficult people. Look, we all know one. Amy's married to one. This is Amy. I'm Rob. That's Sierra.
Rob's married to one as well.
Welcome to the Painted Porch Strategies. Every week, we are busting out our new handbook, or a handbook for new Stoics, I should say, and going week by week through the lessons. And we apply this to our lives, and we apply this to the courses that we have created in our Painted Porch Strategies. So Sierra is our mindfulness guru. Amy is our teamwork expert. Do you have an official title?
I am the mission navigator.
Mission navigator. And I'm the communications guy. I'm the guy that helps you master your message. So they all tie together because we use the Stoic lessons that these amazing teachers have left behind for us. And they meditated on everything that you could possibly think of. So we apply them to our lessons and hope that you can apply them to your lives with us. So thank you for joining us on this video. So this one was a good one. Premeditate on encountering difficult people. Goes into the one that we love the most. I think that this is my favorite Stoic lesson so far that branches out into so many things is premeditatio malorum.
See, I knew you would get on board with it. And yes. I don't know how to say it. I'm so proud of you.
See, progress. But the concept is basically planning ahead, thinking about if a bad event could happen, how would you react? But the idea of planning ahead, okay, so this could go wrong. Someone could steal my parking space at the store in my holiday rush. Someone could be going slow in the fast lane while I'm running late. If you think about those things ahead of time, you'll be prepared for when they happen so you won't fly off the handle. This lesson, week 24, almost halfway through, applies to difficult people. So, Sierra, I would love to know from you right away, what was your main idea going into this? As you read this lesson, what stood out to you?
Well, I was thinking when I started reading it, encountering difficult people. Well, I don't encounter a whole lot of people in person right now because we kind of are home and we're kind of doing our own thing at home. But what I realized is that difficult people, that doesn't necessarily mean that the person is difficult. It could mean that the situation is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an experience this week. We've been learning about Hanukkah for homeschool. Now, we are not Jewish. We don't celebrate Hanukkah, but we were learning about Hanukkah. And I kind of thought that my son would take it like, oh, that's cute, the menorahs, blah, blah, blah. But he had some difficulty with a concept. So I'll tell you more about that later. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is difficult, because a lot of times a person doesn't try to be difficult, but a situation can be difficult or more difficult than you expect.
That is a very great point. I'm looking forward to digging more into that. Amy, what about you?
Well, this whole lesson is my jam. This is one of my favorite ones. In fact, even the quote that they cite here is my absolute favorite quote from Stoicism. There are many, but this is one of my favorites from our boy Marcus Aurelius. And to paraphrase it, basically he's saying that when you wake up in the morning, remind yourself that you are going to encounter people who are meddling, ungrateful, violent, jealous, self-seeking. But there's a catch to it where he's like, you're going to encounter these people, but recognize that many of them behave that way because they don't know any better. They are who they are because of their experiences that they've had over their lifetime. Yet, because of that, even though you're going to encounter these people and they don't know the difference between what is good or bad, we hopefully do know a little bit more. And because of that, we need to be a little bit more compassionate and patient with them. And this ties exactly into what we talk about in my program regarding teamwork, is that he talks about, to end it, to thwart one another is contrary to nature. Basically, we are meant to work with and for one another. If we're constantly bumping up against people and refusing to meet them where they're at, no one's going to benefit from that. So this is really one of my favorite quotes that I, in my prior working life, prior to creating Painted Porch, I practiced this daily to remind myself to be a little bit more patient, a little bit more understanding of times where I am going to bump into people or situations that are going to be a little bit more difficult than desired.
And if you think about that, I love that point so much. It was a nice, refreshing reminder, given the fact that the entire world seems to be stressed out as a whole, because there have been various stages of lockdowns in various countries and various states here in the United States, and various different feelings about that. But people have been losing their minds. There was a teacher caught on video in Bend, Oregon. There was a bunch of protesters out there protesting lockdowns. And I think we we got internet interruptions.
We'll pause for a minute.
Okay. Pausing for a moment. There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Sorry, Sarah, we got stuck over here. So
Yeah, I lost you for a minute.
do you remember the last thing that you heard?
It was like,
Did
I
Amy
would
finish the
say,
quote? To thwart one another is contrary to nature. Did we get that far?
Rob, you had just started speaking.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll pick it up from your quote.
Yeah.
So we'll just pretend you just ended that quote. And scene. And take two. And Amy, I think that is such an important point and refreshing to read that part of the quote, because in this time of COVID, when we have various lockdowns and various stresses about lockdowns and different states here in the United States, if you're watching from outside the country, we have different rules. Different cities have different rules. And people are losing their minds in so many different ways because of the stress. There was a video, I think it was last week, so we're filming this kind of middle of December. So early in December, there were a bunch of protesters in Bend, Oregon. And they were upset about the lockdowns. They didn't want to have any more lockdowns. And they wanted kids to go back to school in person. Well, this one teacher, who obviously was stressed out, pulled into the middle of the road and started yelling at the protesters, saying, "You should kill yourself. I work at a blanking school." So, I mean, I just took that as, wow, to go to Sierra's point. This is a difficult situation for so many people that we're all dealing with it in different ways. That's just one example. There have been numerous people getting in fights over masks. There was another story of a person who did not want to wear a mask when they went into a restaurant, and the server, or it wasn't even the server, it was the hostess, who are typically, 16, 17, 18 years old, was telling this man that he needs to wear a mask, he wants to come in. He threw a glass of water in her face, this teenager's face. So this is a perfect example, to go to Sierra's point, that sometimes it's the situation that's difficult, and in that moment, that person is being difficult. So, Sarah, I want to bring that back in and talk about your situation a little bit more, as we can kind of draw some distinctions, because I think the important lesson is it's in those moments where it can just be a moment, or if it's a person who is difficult in multiple moments, that's perhaps when they become a difficult person.
Yeah. Well, so what I was talking about was, we were discussing Hanukkah. And I had done some premeditatio malorum about how to explain the miracle of the lights. There was only enough oil left for what they thought to be one night. And I knew that was going to be a weird concept because we don't use oil lamps. So I had a plan in mind for that. But basically what happened was, as I was explaining, that another group of people had taken over the Jewish temple and destroyed it. And then when the Jewish people got their temple back and they were trying to clean it up and they were kind of, getting things back in order, the part that my son did not understand at all was why somebody would take over their temple. And he was very upset about why they would do that. Understandably so. Why would somebody do that? So I was glad that I had thought a little bit about this being a difficult concept, especially because of our weekly exercise. The fact that I had thought about that being a difficult thing to explain. He wasn't being difficult. He wasn't trying to not listen to the lesson. There was a part that he could not understand. And in a way, I thought, how great that he doesn't understand that.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, too, that signifies exactly really what Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, was getting at, is that these are emotions that pop up, and they really are what create difficult situations, or people oftentimes. It's that person's emotions in that moment or overall. So, I mean, he talked about People who are violent, who are cunning, who are jealous, who are self-seeking, those are how their brain has interpreted their life, really, and how they're continuing to live their life. Because what I found is that I was living life for much of my life on autopilot, just reacting to things, not even understanding the concept that the Stoics preach is that you actually can control how you practice, how you live. And we go back to Viktor Frankl. We talked about him a couple of weeks ago, who, probably was one of the guys who brought back the idea without calling it Stoicism, but it was after spending so many years in concentration camps in Nazi Germany, he realized there's a stimulus, there's a response, and there's a space between the stimulus and the response. That's essentially what this is. He modernized, I think, the Stoicism virtue of this. And like, if you deal with difficult people, boom, you're going to be stimulated by them being difficult. It's that space before you respond that matters.
Right. It's taking what we talked about, I think, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, about rolling with insults. And it's the three parts, to your point. There's the action, the circumstance that has happened to you, be it, because of the weather or someone else, someone throwing water in your face. And then there's the other two steps where you can decide how you want to interpret that and then how you choose to respond. They talk about here, it's a tough concept to grasp because I can see, like, if I had water thrown in my face, he talks about that we can't be hurt by what others say or do because it's our decision to become involved in what demeans or not, which is tough when you're drenched with water, which is like a physical manifestation of someone spewing something at you, whether verbally or physically, if it's water. So it's a slightly different, it's tough to really be like, okay, I just had water thrown on me. I'm just gonna let it be, because I'm going to choose not to, I'm not going to stoop to their level, but I'm choosing not to react to it. Or I have control over how I can choose to react.
Because them throwing the water says way more about them than it does you.
Correct.
If you can look at it through that lens.
Right.
And I want to go back to this concept, and then I want to get into our weekly lessons that you brought up, Amy, because of the Marcus Aurelius quote that basically we're supposed to work together. And what they write in the new Handbook for New Stoics is, it is unnatural to fight with others. This concept is also rooted in the Stoic ideas of cosmopolitanism and living according to human nature, which I love, because you can imagine if all human beings figured out a way to work together, and at some point we're going to have to, whether I brought this up before, whether it's climate that we all have to solve together because it affects the entire globe, whether it's aliens arrive on Earth or some other catastrophic event, that we're going to have to figure out how to put our differences aside. And that's exactly what they're talking about here. The societies that thrive the most are the societies that figure out how to get along despite the differences. And not only just because of COVID, but our political climate, as we record this, is quite divided. And people who are willing to work with the other side right now are looked at poorly, because you're trying to find ways to collaborate, knowing it's better to have human beings working together than going in this direction. And history proves that. And that's exactly what the Stoics understood. And that's probably why Marcus Aurelius was such an effective emperor for Rome, because he was able to kind of see both sides and deal with what we would say difficult people, and understanding what makes them difficult.
Right. And I love how they talk about in the exercise on page 148, how can you take a few moments each morning to remind yourself to do your best not to be angry or frustrated with the difficult person, but instead work with them. So in the effort of the greater good, of solving the problem, if you will, how can you work together despite that person maybe being difficult or the situation being difficult? How can you work together to come to a good conclusion? How can you create a good society, a functioning society? Because in any society, unless you have photocopies of the same person, people are never going to have all the same opinion and the same reaction. But how can you work together to the greater good?
Right. Exactly.
So what is your
Working
guys?
together, working together, finding ways to work
Mhm.
together is going to produce a lot better outcomes than working against one another.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
I love that quote. Is it better to be right, or is it better to be kind?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
especially when what does actually being right mean? When you really think about it, a lot of the things we base our right and wrong on are theories. And most of the time, let's just be frank, it's not something we're in control of or anything we can really do about.
Hmm.
So we have opinions about the best quarterback of all time. Is it Tom Brady? Is it Joe Montana? Is it Patrick Mahomes? So, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it have to be best?
I'm so mad at you that you didn't mention Joe Namath.
See,
So
that
frustrating.
exactly. This is who I
You're
forget
wrong.
about. I'm going to forget about
Wrong.
somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're wrong about this.
I
But
know.
ultimately, like, does it matter? Unless we are on a committee of the greatest quarterback committee awarding and we're comparing the stats. It's just my opinion and your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And even if I disagree with you, can we still be friends, even if we disagree on quarterbacks?
Ideally, yes. Mm-hmm.
Ideally, because again, to quote, the best course of action is to help our brothers and sisters instead of quarreling.
And if that be well, that I love this point too, and it just made me think of something. If that becomes the goal, right, to be kind, but if you extend that, and if the goal is to the bigger goal, so like let's say I'm attached to being right, but let's say I'm more attached to getting along and collaborating. If that becomes the goal and that's more important to you as a person than being right, you will be able to get so much more done, whether that's at home, whether that's at work, whether that's anywhere in life. So, for example, let's just make something up. Let's say I wasn't doing my part in the house and I wasn't doing the dishes, and the dishes are piled up. And if I decide that being a collaborator with my wife is more important than my hatred of doing the dishes, I could figure out ways to get rid of my disdain for doing the dishes in the spirit of collaboration, because that's more important to me than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And if you live your life with that in mind, your relationships, I'm going to bet, are going to be much better. If the idea is to have smooth relationships, even if you got to suck it up sometimes and put your opinion aside, you're going to be much better off and you're going to be much more at peace.
Well, I think even to add to that, Rob, though, as you were talking, it's not about being a pushover. It's not about letting people walk all over you. It's not letting people take advantage of you. It's just being very clear about what you value more, what is most important to you, because then it becomes, to use a Stoic term, it becomes an indifferent. It's not you being a pushover. It's just that's not important to you. Something else
Right.
is more important to you when it comes to the relationship that you have with others. So it's not I'm acquiescing to, what you're saying is the best quarterback. All I'm saying is I don't really care who the best quarterback is. In my opinion, I just want to sit down and watch football with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's more important to me. So that's really where it is. It's not sacrificing who you are in any way. It's just retooling or, kind of reconfiguring where your priorities lie when it comes to your interaction with human nature, with your fellow man, and whether you choose to want to be more, I'll say harmonious. It's not like kumbaya, but it's being able to get along more without necessarily feeling as if you're sacrificing your values in any way.
That same Marcus Aurelius quote says, "We are made for cooperation, like the feet, the hands, the eyelids, the upper and lower rows of teeth." We are, and it's in our true nature to cooperate. And so instead of always fighting against this true nature, again, it's what's more important to you? Is it more important that you're absolutely right, or you check the internet about stats on the quarterbacks or whatever? Or is it more important to have harmony in your partnership, just like a pair of feet, a pair of hands? If one foot is doing completely the other thing, you're going to end up walking around in a circle. And is the goal to walk in a circle, or is the goal to walk forward?
Yep.
When you think about, too, if you want to add real life examples to this, there's three that popped into my head as you were talking, Sierra, in that Nelson Mandela, who was obviously imprisoned in apartheid, but I think he was in prison for 27 years, but he read every day and he got his mind ready every day. And he was calm and peaceful. And despite what happened to him, was still able to basically end apartheid in a country in the 90s. Like, this was a country that in the 90s, a modern world country that literally divided people on race. And it took a man who went to prison to really unravel that, because he had the right mindset and he knew that he couldn't just cast stones. He knew that he had to convince the other side and work with them to say, you know what, this is wrong. Martin Luther King did the same exact thing. So people forget.
Bridges.
He did.
Yeah.
He walked across bridges and he built bridges.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it took, because people forget that the Montgomery bus boycott was in 1955, I think. The Civil Rights Act didn't pass until 1964. Unfortunately, it takes a very long time to do this. And same thing with Gandhi. Those were the three examples that came to mind. It took years of being calm and being willing to work with people that literally hate you in order to convince other people that, wow, he's right. Those three men in this example were right. Then they were able to change the world, or at least their countries, but the world, and a ripple effect of that.
Yeah. I mean, no one has ever been had their opinion changed by being yelled at. So,
true story. Just yell right back.
No one's like, wow, you yelled louder, so you convinced me. Thank you.
Right.
Civil discourse, which is so true of, when you think about people who are trying to create change today. There's the effective path, and then there's the one that's going to be a little bit more difficult to traverse. Nobody likes to be scolded.
Exactly. So what did you both do for your lessons this week? So each week in the Handbook for New Stoics, they have us do a lesson to try to imprint this in our brain so we remember the lesson. So Sierra, what did you go with? I mean, you mentioned your son in Hanukkah, so that was part.
I did. I reminded myself that, like you were talking about, the pause. So when some of these difficult things came up, I gave myself a pause. We actually did a pause together. I said, let's take 3 deep breaths together. And what that did, it did a couple of things. It helped me breathe, and he breathed with me, which lowers your heart rate, which calms your nervous system down. But it also gave me some time to think, right? Instead of just bleh, because I said, right? It gave me some time to think. That I practiced the pause. And I just said that, it's my role to be helpful, but know that not everything is in my complete control. Mm-hmm. And that just became a mantra of, I can be helpful, but not everything is within my control to be of everything.
See, and these are the type of lessons that we put in our courses, because we know that these 3 things that we teach will help either you as a person or your company that you work for kind of go from good to great, but stay great. Because if you use these philosophies that we've embraced in our lives and the skills we teach you in our courses, it's enhancing those skills that we all have so you can use them every single day without thinking about them. So that's why we're doing these exercises as well. And I love that, Sierra, you didn't just do it for you. You were teaching your son this lesson too. So you got to be student and teacher at the same time, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Amy, what'd you write?
So for mine, just to kind of touch on what the exercise was, what they wanted us to do was essentially create our own version of Marcus's daily reminder. So each day, write down a little bit of a reminder for ourselves that we will likely encounter frustrating people or situations, that those people are doing what they think is right, and that you ultimately are trying to help improve yourself, and you're only going to focus on what's in your control. And then some of the reasons why you'll be better off if you do actually work with others. What's the benefit of doing so versus getting frustrated with them? So for me, a lot of mine, I'm kind of like Sierra. I don't deal with a lot of frustrating people. I tend to deal with a lot of frustrating, as you all know, technology or situations. Those are the things that tend to frustrate me the most. Not so much people. People I can usually ultimately deal with after, just a little bit. It's the other things that perpetually grate me. So for me, what I talked about is I reminded myself that um, things or people will most likely not go or behave as I expect or as I want them to. But I reminded myself that this is their nature. And it's the nature of the universe, which I said is intelligent chaos. And so it helps to um, work with, not against, what nature is ultimately putting in front of me. So that was my reminder that I set. Intelligent chaos. So just embrace it versus trying to fight it. I love, even here on page 147, they talk about it's just, these difficult situations or people are just it's the way things are. And to wish otherwise is to yearn for a fig in wintertime. And that's a metaphor from Epictetus. So I loved that. I highlighted and circled that. I was like, what a great way to think about it. That
I totally thought of you when I read that.
it's the shoulds. It's the shoulds that trip me up. This should work this way. This shouldn't take this long. This should, if I click this button, I should have this happen. Never happens. So again, it's my reminder of that intelligent chaos, and it's the nature of things to not go as I want them. I am not the all-seeing emperor of the world, the universe.
No, but it's also, a test, right? I mean, all of these things are meant to test us,
Mm-hmm.
and you can kind of measure yourself against them. So when you do run into intelligent chaos, it's like, how am I responding to this? And is there something else I can do? And trying to stay as calm while doing it, which was my main thing, was patience.
Yeah.
Whether it's a frustrating situation, a frustrating person, whether it's I'm being criticized. So that was part one of what stood out to me is I put patience is required. I mean, really, that was my lesson from number one. The other thing I thought of too is ties into kind of what you guys said. What am I labeling that's difficult? And is it my label that's the issue? So to try to open it up and say, okay, maybe this is me being difficult, not the other thing or the other situation or person that's being difficult. Perhaps it is me that is being difficult.
I think that's pretty true for me most
times. Well, but I think that's probably true for all of us.
My shoulds.
Yeah.
I want it to work this way. Why doesn't it work this way?
This is my opinion on it, and this is the way it is, and that's kind of the world I deal in. In my day job, I'm a radio talk show host. And we deal with people who are pretty certain in their beliefs most often than not. And when you challenge those beliefs, even if you're on the same side theoretically as someone else, there's certain difficulties in that and criticisms that come with that. And the other challenge I had is I have different levels of tolerance based on how I slept the night before. So there was a challenge in being tired. I'm less likely to be able to handle things patiently. So that is something that I have to be cognizant of. And oftentimes that we have an impression from movies and television, the best way to deal with difficult people is to have that one-liner, that zinger. And I'm like, but that's not the real world. We just think it is because we see it on TV and our brain can't differentiate between what's real and what's not in a moment. So oftentimes we're looking for a zinger and a one-liner, yes. But I'm like, you have to understand, a movie script was written down, rewritten, probably 20 or 40 times, somewhere in that neighborhood. And the actors probably did 12 takes, 15 takes. Maybe they did it in one take, but chances are they didn't. So that is all planned, redone, re-edited. Yeah. So the reason that line works is because they got it right, but that's just not how the real world works.
And think of the intent. The intent of that script is for entertainment. Mm-hmm. Whereas the intent of a real conversation, according to the Stoics, is about working together.
Yes, exactly. It all comes back to Real Housewives. That's not the real world. That's not how real people interact. Flipping tables when you're mad doesn't help you get along with your fellow housewives.
But it looks good on TV.
But it looks good on TV.
But it doesn't look good in the real world.
No, you would.
And
again,
like the bill from the restaurant for all the things you broke.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
or arrested, let's forget about the consequences of those actions. And real people, if you do that around real people, they're gonna be like, we're not hanging out with her again, she's crazy.
Yes, exactly.
So I love how, you talk about the label is, and again, because everything can only affect you if you allow it to. So it's only difficult if you look at it through the difficult lens.
Right. And to take that a step further, going with what we've learned with Stoicism, is that the only things that we can truly label are that which is under our control. The only things that are good or bad are the things that we ultimately control. In their philosophy, everything else is either a preferred or dispreferred or an indifferent, because you cannot control it. Yeah.
I love this lesson. I think it's one of the most important ones because it probably comes up daily in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's to Sierra's point or your point, Amy, it's a frustration on technology, whether it's a frustration with the person you're dealing with, whether it is you being difficult, quite frankly. And,
That's such a great way to spin it around, Rob, to just like bring it 360, which is really ultimately what Stoicism is you working on you focusing on you and how you are contributing to the betterment or not so great improvements of the world. And I love the label part, because ultimately, Sarah, to your point, it's whether you ultimately choose whether or not you think this thing is good or bad, or
right or wrong,
or whatever it might be. Ultimately, that's up to you to decide.
And more often than not, life's going to go on regardless of whether you're right or wrong, or something you think is right or wrong.
Right.
Sorry, Sierra.
Well, and so much of why we have friction in our own mind is because if we've premeditated how we think something is going to go, it's like we've pre-scripted it. And then when something changes and we're like, oh crap, I have to change the script. But if we think instead of think of it as an improv instead, and okay, oh, here's this different scenario. How is this an opportunity for me to think about it? How is this an opportunity for me to grow, or for me to think about it from another angle, or to see it in somebody else's light, instead of worrying about my script went off kilter. It's not DLP, dead letter perfect. I wasn't expecting this at all. When we expect the unexpected, then we're ready. And when you practice being ready for whatever, then you're so much more well equipped for stuff that you don't know, which is everything.
And this is exactly why I want to work with you, because we have learned these skills. We know the skills. We want to enhance your skills. Of course. But I mean, that's what life is. Really. Life is all about practicing these skills over and over again. It's not about being perfect, because, again, I'll use my boy Peter Crone, who I talk about a lot. He calls himself the mind architect. He says, please never be perfect, because then you'll have no one to relate to. And it's such a good way to say it. So keep that in mind. But yes, we appreciate you watching us here. We are Painted Porch Strategies. That right there is Sierra, our mindfulness guru. This is Amy, a mission navigator. I'm Rob, the guy that's going to help you master your message, to deal with all of these things, all these outside influences, so that you can enhance your skills. You can be the best version of you. I know that's an overused phrase, but we actually have the practical skills you can use every single day to do it. We're going to continue this next week, because now the week 25 lesson is dealing virtuously with frustrating people. So we're going to turn into our inner Gandhi and our inner Martin Luther Kings and our inner Nelson Mandelas next week. So it's going to be fantastic. So if you want to reach out to us, you can find us at paintedporchstrategies.com. You can email us. You can set up a call with us. We'd love to chat with you and help you or your company.
And we would also love to know if you've watched this and you did this lesson, what maybe one or more of your morning meditations were that you came up with as well. So share them with us. We'd love to know.
Until next week, we'll see you right here again on the porch.